Welcome, everyone. Today's presentation is titled eCTD Submission Challenges. Our speakers for today are Carrie Whittakin and Carrie Ghana. Carrie is currently a regulatory operations specialist at Certara Synchrogenics. She's an experienced submission publisher, having supported numerous applications, including NDAs, ANDAs, INDs, and maintenance submissions. Joining Carrie is Carrie, who is currently a senior regulatory operations specialist at Certara Synchrogenics. Carrie has several years' experience in regulatory operations, electronic publishing, and over 20 years serving in leadership roles. Carrie and Carrie, welcome to today's event, and I will now send it over to Carrie to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, I'm Carrie Whittakin, and I'm excited to speak with you today alongside my colleague, Carrie. I'd like to thank RAPS as well as Certara for this opportunity, but I'd also like to thank Carrie for joining me and co-presenting.
Hi there, my name is Carrie, and I'm so grateful to be co-presenting with Carrie on this important and relevant topic of eCTD challenges we face today. I want to also thank RAPS for graciously providing us the time and space to present to you today. Before we begin, let's take a quick look at our agenda and key points for today's presentation. We're going to take a look at some of the more common US regional challenges and identify their solutions. We'll also take a look at the current state of US Regional Module 1 administrative information, including various forms. And then we'll define and discuss group submissions for promotional materials, followed by an update on the path forward with DTD versions. So let's get started and jump right on into our first eCTD challenge: technical rejections with applicable solutions. On the left column here, we see some of the more common technical rejections experienced in the eCTD space. So I'll run through these from top to bottom and identify the correct means of action with the solutions listed on the right side column. Let's start with the first one here: duplicate sequence numbers. This may seem obvious, but it certainly happens. Prior to submitting, it's important to take just an extra minute or two to ensure your sequence number is correct and hasn't been used before. This error falls under validation criteria 1697 of the specs for eCTD validation criteria. By the way, at the end of this presentation slide deck, you'll find a reference slide with direct links to all documentation referenced throughout this presentation. Now, if you do run into this and receive a technical rejection, you'll simply want to resubmit your submission using a 4-digit sequence number that's unique to your application. Other noteworthy validation criteria to be mindful of fall under numbers 1306 and 1323. Effective just recently in March of this year, these produce a high severity error and will result in submission rejection. To avoid these altogether, ensure the leaf element file is included and the leaf element and file are correctly named and placed. If you receive a rejection due to one or both errors, simply make your correction and resubmit. Dataset technical rejections. Now, these validation errors fall under numbers 1734 and 1789. And these are the most common, and they do result in rejections. To avoid a potential rejection altogether, you must include a data set named the TS or trial summary.xpt, which includes information on the study start date for each study in 4.2 or in sections 5.3. Please note the FDA does not provide a free send validation tool, so do your homework and be sure to go with a tool that adheres to the FDA guidelines for send datasets. If you do not submit the ts.xpt dataset and receive a rejection, you'll need to obtain the dataset for your application and resubmit. This is not an exhaustive list, of course, so please take a few minutes to familiarize yourself with the specs for eCTD validation criteria. Doing so may save you quite a bit of time and, of course, a headache. And while not necessarily validation errors, I do want to just briefly bring your attention to the last two notes here. You may or may not be aware that for CBER, it will be required that non-clinical study data sets need to be provided in CDISC send format beginning March 23rd, 2023. So just shy from a year from now. And with changes such as these, it's important to remain proactive by staying versed with the relevant guidance documents. The last note here on the left is regarding RTFs, or refuse to file. This happens when the FDA receives an application that has significant deficiencies that prevent review. There is some good help on how to avoid this in the Good Review Management Principles and Practices for PDUFA Products. This is a helpful document that outlines what an orderly application looks like from the perspective of a reviewer. And if your focus is on the regulatory side of things, this is where you want to ensure your application reflects adequate information and for all indications included, and that the information is clear. And if you're on the operations and publishing side of your application and you see something that just doesn't add up or is unclear, bring it to the attention of your team and resolve issues prior to submitting and avoid receiving an RTF altogether. As I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but hopefully this gives you insight into a few of the common technical rejections and provides a path forward if ever you encounter these. I'm going to hand it back over to Carrie now to talk us through some of the common US regional and form specific helps, as well as some information on inspections.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm going to take a moment to go over some of the most commonly seen FDA forms. Please note that this is not a complete comprehensive list of all the forms the FDA uses. And different applications could require different forms, and the FDA certainly can ask for different and/or additional forms. As I'm sure most of you know, different applications require different forms. Different divisions or offices may require different forms as well. For example, CDER requires a 1571 for pre-INDs, while CBER does not. We recommend that you always check on the FDA website for the most current form you are working with and download the most commonly used forms. However, it does help to know the version of the forms you will be using. For example, upon initially looking up the 1571, version 0319 is often given, while it's version 0419 that's most current. This will not cause a rejection in the submission, but note, it is still a risk. We listed some of the most commonly used forms on this slide. Besides the 1571 that is used for pre-INDs and INDs, the 356H is used for NDAs and ANDAs. These forms are used to extract the data in order to process the submission. An important item to note is that due to the enabled security, digital signatures cannot be used. However, you can submit 2 copies if one is signed and scanned, while the other is a completed fillable form. The 2252 is used for annual reports of NDAs, ANDAs, and BLAs, but not INDAs. The 3674 is a certificate of compliance that's used for clinical information updates and INDs. For example, you would submit this for protocol updates and amendments and PI updates. Speaking of PI updates, a 1572 is used for the principal investigator information for clinical studies and is submitted for each study site in the study. It's used for adding, removing, or replacing an investigator. The FDA requires that the 1572 be submitted within 30 days of an investigator being added to the study. Along with the 1572, the principal investigator should include an updated CV. It is worth noting that sub-PIs are not required to submit a CV, although some organizations may choose to do so. Another thing I want to note, while not a form, an important piece of eCTD submission is the inclusion of a unique 9-digit identifier known as the DUNS number. This was introduced with the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2017, and it is free to obtain. So on our next slide, the common US region challenges, some more of the Module 1 administration information. I won't go over all of them, or even all the ones that I have listed on the slide. However, there are a few that I felt were worth noting. The US agent submitted in section 1312 is required when a company outside of the United States wants to submit to the FDA. However, the transfer of obligation in 1314 is used when an organization within within the US wants to transfer obligations to a contract research organization. For example, a CRO may use this when authorizing an organization to send their submissions to the FDA for them. Also included in Section 1.3 is a company's change of address, corporate name, contact or agent, or a change of sponsor. Next, in Section 1.4 is an administrative reference section when one IND references another. Section 1.4.4 is used even between INDs of the same sponsor. Section 1.13 is used for annual reports. There are 15 subsections that an annual report is broken up into. And just a reminder from the previous slide, a 2252 will be included when an annual report is submitted for NDAs, ANDAs, and BLAs. Section 114 is used for labeling, including the investigator brochure, which should be included when multiple clinical sites are used. And over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of emergency use authorization requests due to the pandemic. For requests of EUA, Section 119 is used. It's a tool the FDA can use to expedite use of medical products, including drugs and vaccines, when time is not available. For example, during a public health emergency, like we've seen with COVID. But it's also used when the protocol criteria of a study protocol is not met by a potential participant. I'd like to touch on the FDA's Bioresearch monitoring, known as BIMO. BIMO inspections will become more prevalent. However, 2020's inspections total were the lowest we've seen since at least 2011. Only 14% of inspections were for cause in 2020, and 70 to 80% of inspections are within the US each year. A few examples of observations that are found during inspections include, for common PI observations, there are failure to comply with the 1572 requirements, protocol deviations, informed consent issues, and or safety reporting. Common sponsor or CRO observations include failure to submit an IND. Now, the FDA Small Business and Industry Assistance offers free webinars on the topic. We have a link on the reference page that Carrie's mentioned at the end of our slides where you can find more information about that free webinar. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Carrie to go over group submissions.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, we're going to spend a few minutes discussing group submissions, particularly those for promotional materials. We'll define what a group submission is for those of you who this may be a new element of eCTD for you. And we'll also take a quick look at some of the technical aspects to consider. And then finally, we'll look at the Form 2253 and identify some of the common errors in hopes you can avoid these altogether. So what is a group submission for promotional materials? A group submission for promotional materials is one that is a single submission in eCTD format that contain promotional materials promoting more than one product. They also include current labeling for each promoted product. An exception to this includes draft labeling for accelerated approval or for advisory committee. Promoted products must also be for the same application type. That is either consumer or professional. You cannot submit both consumer and professional together. They do need to be submitted separately. There are just a few technical considerations to keep in mind with group submissions. Namely, the US regional.xml file must include all member applications in the application set section. And each member application must include a sequence number. Just a quick note on the sequence numbers. These must be unique to their respective application. They must not have been previously submitted, again, under its respective application, because if any group submission in an application number and sequence number combo that's already been submitted previously, the entire group will be rejected. So you definitely want to avoid this by using that unique sequence number. For a group submission, you'll want to be sure to use and include the Form 2253. As is the case with all forms, be sure to pull the form from the FDA website to ensure you're using the most updated form. As Carrie already stated, simply Googling forms can often lead to an old, expired form, and you don't want that. So grab the form from the FDA website. Instructions are also available on the website, and we've linked directly to them at the end of this presentation. When submitting a group submission, you'll obviously want to ensure the form is completed and accurate. In addition to the form, you'll need to include current PIs for all members of the group, as well as clean copies of all promotional materials. Continuing on with the Form 2253, it's important the application listed as the lead application in the US regional.xml file matches the application listed on the 2253. Also important is section 7.a of the form, in which you'd indicate a multi-product submission. And any non-lead members ought to be listed on a separate supplemental application list, which should include the application type and number, the product name, and the date and file name of the current PI. Now, this supplemental application list can be placed in the application in the same section as your completed 2253. Let's review just for a moment the labeling and materials to be included. Grouped 2253 submissions must be accompanied by current product labeling for each member of the group and must be placed in section 114.6. It's important the submission includes a separate PDF copy of each label. If the current product label has already been submitted, it is possible to simply cross-reference. This may look different depending on the submission builder you use, of course. For materials, you'll want to include only one set in section 115.2. Each material included will be linked to all members of the group. Next, I want to take a moment to mention non-2253 group submissions. For a non-2253 group submission, a cover letter should be included, and it ought to include all member applications with the type, number, and product name identified. If your cover letter includes this information, it is not necessary to submit a supplemental application list. Be sure and use that subject line to reference the lead application number and clearly identify the submission as a group. This will certainly help move your application through its review without confusion or room for confusion. All right, one last slide here on group submissions. You'll see on the table included here the types of applications allowed and to which center accepts these types of group submissions. So for example, note the ANDA application on the top of the table. CDER accepts the listed group submissions while CBER does not. So this is important to note and consider when preparing your group submissions for your varying application types. And then a common error that occurs with batched materials is when submitting promotional materials for multiple products and the materials provided do not promote all members of the group. An example of this is when grouped 2253 submissions contained 3 member applications and 15 promotional materials with 5 materials promoting product A, 5 promoting product B, and 5 promoting product C, or when none of the materials promote products A, B, and C. It's important promotional materials promote all products listed in the group. I recognize this is a lot of information on group submissions, and for some of you who may be learning all you can right now on group submissions, I encourage you to check the FDA's website for more information and industry standards. In addition to guidance documents, there are also webinars and presentation slides available with helpful tools to help you navigate and successfully submit group submissions. I'm going to hand it back over to Carrie now to talk to us about DTD versions and what's on the horizon with the implementation of DTD version 4. Carrie?
Thanks, Carrie. The new Module 1 just went into effect this March. If one DTD version 2.01 is used, it will fail validation and will not be able to go through the gateway. But do not be surprised if you see this if you inherit an application, perhaps through an acquisition or integration. The FDA currently plans to begin accepting version 4.0 in 2023. But to begin with, only initial applications will use this format, while version 3.3 will be used for existing applications. It's expected to take 2 years to fully transition to when the FDA mandates that version 4.0 be used. Several agencies are preparing to transition to the new version as we speak. Japan is the pilot, but other regions such as the EMA, Australia, Brazil, Canada, and Switzerland are preparing pilots to follow. We expect some interesting benefits when the new version goes into effect. I've listed some of what we expect to see. Two-way communication, which is a feature of great interest, won't be available at first, but is suspected to come out in subsequent rollouts. The benefit of reusable documents will allow a reference without the physical document having to be included in a submission. However, before those documents can be reused, they will need to be included in a transition mapping message to assign a unique identifier and metadata for the document. It should eliminate the practice of study tagging files, or commonly called STFs. When you begin to develop a strategy for transitioning your content to version 4.0, you should take into consideration some recommendations. Your transition content will need to undergo lifecycle management. You'll need to provide all additional metadata required in order to enable document reuse. Consider a strategy across application for sender-defined keywords, especially in the case of group submissions, like Carrie just went over. And understand how new rules will affect the lifecycle management, like with context groups. I included the reference to the FDA's technical guidance for version 4.0 on our reference slide. Now, I'm going to hand it back over to Carrie one last time so she can wrap everything up. Carrie?
Thanks, Carrie. We really hope this has been an informative and applicable presentation for you. I hope you're taking with you some helpful learnings around some of the common technical rejections and their solutions, as well as helpful FDA forms and Module 1 regional information. We hope this has served as an encouraging reminder to stay current with industry standards, guidelines, and the ever-evolving world of electronic publishing, eCTD filing, and preparing for what's to come in the future of regulatory. With the right perspective, eCTD challenges can create incredible opportunities to help shape and navigate an ever-growing and changing industry benefiting so many people in today's world. Please be sure and take advantage of the references provided here that include direct links to what we believe will serve you as you encounter challenges and work towards solutions. Finally, on behalf of Carrie and myself, we want to thank RAPS for the space and time to present today on this relevant topic. And thank you to those tuning in for your leadership and hard work to help shape the industry.
Thank you
Thanks again.
so much. Thank you so much, Carrie and Carrie, for that informative presentation. On behalf of Certara, I'd like to thank our speakers for an excellent presentation, and thank you to RAPS for allowing us to host with them. So this concludes the webinar, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye.